Welcome, everyone. Today we're diving deep into some tough realities of life in Japan. We're
Yeah.
going way beyond, the bright lights and tourist attractions.
Right.
We've got a fascinating source for this one, a Chinese commentator, actually,
Oh, wow.
who's been looking at some really powerful NHK documentaries and the books that went along with them.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is how this commentator connects these stories back to their own society,
Okay.
finding parallels that might surprise you.
Interesting.
And, they might even make you think about things a bit differently.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what these documentaries uncovered.
Well, they really don't shy away from difficult topics.
Right.
We're talking elderly poverty, women struggling to make ends meet,
Right.
and the whole phenomenon of social isolation that's, becoming more and more prevalent in Japan.
Yeah, I've heard a bit about that.
Yeah, so let's jump right in.
Okay.
The first thing that really struck me was this concept of old age bankruptcy.
Old age bankruptcy.
Yeah, it's this idea that people work their entire lives, right, expecting to have a comfortable retirement,
Yeah.
and then they find themselves struggling financially in their golden years.
Wow, that's tough.
Yeah, and one story that really illustrated this was about this 80-year-old woman, Yamamoto,
Okay.
who dedicated her whole life to her career. She never married, never had children, really put all her energy into her work, believing that, that would secure her future.
Right. Very common.
But it didn't quite work out that way.
No, it seems like a lot of people fall into that trap.
Yeah, she made this decision to take a lump sum payout from her corporate pension, thinking it would be enough.
Yeah.
But as she got older, those funds dwindled, and she ended up relying solely on this very meager national pension.
Wow.
And it got to the point where she was having to choose between basic necessities like food and healthcare.
Oh, gosh, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine having to make those kinds of choices at 80 years old?
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
It makes you wonder, right?
Yeah. If working hard your whole life is really enough to guarantee a secure future.
Absolutely. And this isn't just one isolated case, is it?
No, not at all.
No, I was about to say.
The source mentions another story about Kawani, an 83-year-old man battling cancer.
Oh, wow.
And he's also struggling to afford his medical expenses and basic needs on a limited pension.
It seems like this is becoming a more widespread issue.
It really is, especially in Japan with their rapidly aging population.
That's right.
Is there something specific about the way Japan's society is structured or their systems that contribute to this?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Japan has a very high life expectancy, which is fantastic.
Right.
But it also means they have a large aging population.
Yeah.
By 2007, over 21.5% of the population was already 65 or older.
Wow.
And that puts a lot of pressure on their social security system,
Yeah, I bet.
especially with rising living costs.
Right.
And, the traditional family structure where children would often care for their parents.
Right.
That's changing. So many seniors are left without that safety net. So it's like this combination of individual choices, but also these larger societal shifts.
Yeah, like a complex issue.
It really makes you think about, how prepared other countries are for this kind of aging population.
That's a good question.
Are we doing enough to ensure that living longer doesn't automatically mean struggling financially?
That's something we need to be thinking about for sure.
Yeah, and it brings up another concerning issue that's highlighted in this deep dive.
Okay, what's that?
The alarming rate of poverty among young women in Japan.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that was such a problem.
It really challenges the image we often have of Japan as this wealthy and technologically advanced nation.
It does.
It's a side of Japan that doesn't get talked about much.
No, not at all.
But the source really highlights how women, particularly those stuck in non-permanent employment,
Right.
they face this uphill battle for economic stability.
That's rough.
Yeah, there's this significant gender disparity in the Japanese job market. Women are often relegated to these low-paying, insecure jobs with very little chance of advancement.
I see.
And that's where the story of Yumi comes in.
Emmy.
Yeah, she's this 19-year-old girl who's working multiple jobs
Oh, gosh.
just to make ends meet.
Wow.
Her stories is really powerful. I mean, she was sacrificing sleep, food, even taking on debt to support her family.
That's incredible.
It just shows you the lack of adequate social safety nets for women in these situations.
Yeah, it sounds like they're really vulnerable.
Very vulnerable, and it gets even more complicated because the source points out this really unsettling juxtaposition.
Okay, I'm listening.
While Japan is struggling to support women like Yumi,
Right.
it also has this thriving sex industry.
That's interesting.
And the commentators suggest that this industry in some ways preys on the very economic vulnerabilities that we've been talking about.
Wow, so it's like a vicious cycle.
It is. They even mention that some brothels specifically target single mothers.
Really?
offering them childcare and flexible work hours as incentives.
So it's like a twisted kind of support system.
Yeah, on the surface, it might seem like a solution,
Right.
but it really speaks to this lack of real support systems for these women,
Yeah.
pushing them towards desperate measures.
It makes you think about what kind of society allows this to happen.
It does, and it makes you wonder, how can we create environments that genuinely empower women
Right?
and offer them real choices, not just survival tactics?
That's the key, isn't it? Real choices.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really makes you think. And it's not just about economic hardship. This deep dive also explores the growing issue of social isolation in Japan.
Right. That's something I've been hearing more and more about.
And the source introduces us to this concept called muonsha.
Wensha.
Yeah, it refers to individuals who are completely isolated from social connections.
They're like people who are totally alone.
Yeah, basically. And they illustrate this with a really tragic story of this 73-year-old man, Omori Tadatoshi,
Yeah.
who died alone in his apartment.
Oh gosh, that's awful.
And what's even more heartbreaking is that his body wasn't discovered for weeks.
Wow.
And when it was, no one came forward to claim his remains.
So he was completely alone,
It's this invisible crisis of loneliness that's affecting so many people.
especially in those big cities, I imagine.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the crowd.
Yeah. It makes you wonder how many others are out there, silently struggling with this kind of isolation.
Thousands, probably.
More than we can imagine, I bet.
The source says that over 32,000 unclaimed bodies are found in Japan each year,
Wow.
many of whom are believed to have been muonsha.
That's a staggering number.
It is, and it really makes you think about, what's contributing to this trend of isolation in Japan.
Well, Japan's traditional family structure, which used to be a strong social safety net,
Right.
that's weakening.
Yeah.
Marriage rates are declining. More people are choosing to live alone.
Yeah, you see that in a lot of places.
And the pressure to succeed in such a competitive work environment. That also contributes to the social withdrawal. People prioritize work over personal relationships.
So it's like this combination of societal shifts, but also individual pressures.
Yeah, it's a complex interplay of factors.
It really is. Are there any efforts being made to address this issue?
Well, the source does mention some initiatives that are trying to combat this growing problem.
Okay. Like what?
There are some nonprofit organizations that are creating these communal living spaces
Interesting.
designed to foster connection and support among residents.
So like intentional communities.
Exactly, recognizing that we need new ways to build social connections in a world that's becoming so individualized.
It really does make you think about the importance of community in your own life.
It does. Where do you find your sense of belonging and support?
That's a good question to ask yourself. And it leads us to the final topic covered in this deep dive.
Okay, what's that?
What the commentator calls failure to launch at 30.
Failure to launch at 30. Okay.
It starts with a story that's almost too shocking to believe.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
The source tells us about a 39-year-old man in Fukuoka who was found dead in his apartment.
Okay.
The cause of death, starvation?
Starvation. In Japan.
It's hard to wrap your head around that.
It really is. How is that even possible in a developed country?
Well, it speaks to this immense pressure that young people in Japan face to achieve success and meet these societal expectations.
Right. The pressure to succeed is everywhere.
It is. And in this man's case, he had lost his job after Japan's economic bubble burst in the 1990s.
Oh, right. The economic bubble. I've heard of that, but I don't really know the details.
Yeah, it was this period of rapid economic growth in the 1980s, soaring stock prices, real estate values.
Okay, so like a boom time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it wasn't sustainable.
What happened?
By the early 1990s, the bubble burst, led to a prolonged period of economic stagnation. Companies went bankrupt. Unemployment rose.
So a whole generation was impacted.
Yeah, a generation of young people entering the workforce faced this much harsher reality than they had anticipated.
Wow, so this man was part of that generation that had their dreams dashed.
Exactly. He was laid off from his job, struggled to find new employment,
Oh, man.
and the pressure to succeed, coupled with this sense of shame, it prevented him from seeking help.
Even though Japan has a pretty strong social safety net.
It does, but he felt so alone and trapped.
That's just tragic.
And what's even more heartbreaking is that he died with a note that simply said, "Save me."
Yeah, wow.
It's a reminder that economic hardship, it doesn't just mean material deprivation.
Right.
It takes a toll on mental health and well-being.
Absolutely.
And it highlights this need for greater awareness and support
Yeah,
for those who are struggling silently, even in societies that appear prosperous on the surface.
I agree. These stories paint such a different picture of Japan than what we're used to seeing.
They do, but the commentator doesn't seem to be criticizing Japan.
Really?
In fact, they find something admirable in how the country confronts these issues.
Okay, I'm curious about that.
It is interesting, right? They see this openness as a positive thing.
Yeah, it's like they're willing to acknowledge these problems and try to find solutions.
Exactly. They're not sweeping them under the rug.
No, they're facing them head on.
And the commentator even contrasts it with their own society, where they feel like these kinds of discussions are often suppressed.
So they see it as a sign of strength almost.
Yeah, like a willingness to be open and honest, even if it's uncomfortable.
Right, and to learn from those experiences.
And that really resonated with me because it makes you realize that these challenges aren't unique to Japan.
You're right, poverty, isolation, economic vulnerability. These things exist everywhere.
It's so easy to think of them as problems over there, but the commentator's reflections really challenge that.
They do. It's like looking in a mirror in a way.
Yeah, you start to see those parallels in your own community.
It's the power of stories. I think they help us connect with people who might seem very different from us.
They remind us that we're all human and we all face challenges.
Exactly, and that we can learn from each other.
So where do we go from here? What can we do with this new understanding?
Well, it might feel daunting, but I think it starts with individual action.
Okay, what do you mean?
It could be volunteering at a local organization that helps people in need,
Right.
or having open conversations with friends and family about these issues.
Bringing it into the light.
Exactly. Or even just being more mindful of the language we use and the judgments we make.
Small steps can make a big difference.
They can. It's about fostering empathy and compassion.
Right.
Recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world.
And that's a powerful message to end on. The challenges we've talked about today are complex,
They are.
but they're not insurmountable.
Definitely not.
It starts with each of us choosing to be more aware, more compassionate, and more engaged
I agree.
in creating a world where everyone has the opportunity not just to survive, but to thrive.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some new perspectives to think about and maybe even some inspiration to make a difference in your own corner of the world.
It's been a great conversation.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.